Really want to just talk about some of the stuff I wish I'd known before I started. I paid out so much money that was unnecessary. I didn't realise that you only needed, let's say, 12 colours to get started. I didn't understand the difference between student quality paints and professional quality paints. And there were a lot of things I've discovered along the way that I think if I'd knew first off, it would have really helped me. So one of the key things is always buy the best quality products that you can afford, the best quality materials, even for practice, particularly with something like watercolour, where the high quality pigments and paints behave in a completely different way to the cheaper ones, because the cheaper ones are full of filler, whereas the high quality ones are pure pigment. And although they seem really expensive at the start, they go such a long way. You'll have them for years. If you're serious about getting into watercolour and you want to try and do your best, then the materials can hold you back because you won't get the same results if you practice with cheaper things. If you are going to go with student grade, and there's nothing wrong with student grade, what I'm saying is don't buy the really cheap ones from some of the budget shops. But if you go with student grade, you'll be going with professional art companies. And their student grade are good quality, but they will have a little more filler in them, but they'll still be perfectly good to work with. And likewise with paper, there's different types of paper, cellulose and cotton, and cotton is by far superior. And again, if you practice with cheap paints on cheap paper, when you come to do your work that you might be interested in selling or displaying, and you do it on professional paper and with professional paints, it will look completely different. So you really do have to practice with what you're going to be using full time. There are some budget paint sets that I can recommend. I've just bought myself a set of Meaden and I'm going to be using them. They come as tubes and I'm going to be using them for my sort of workshops where I have a lot of people all painting at the same time. And they are beautiful colours. They behave like watercolours. They're from a Chinese manufacturer, and a lot of the people that I've seen review them on YouTube have basically said the pigments are not the pure pigments, so there may be some inks in there. So it depends how much of a purist you are, but they're probably quite a good kit to get started with. Another thing to think about is there are set colours that you should become really familiar with, things like your ultramarine blue, cobalt. You really probably need 3 blues to get started, so cerulean might be another, even Prussian blue. You'll need possibly 3 reds, so a warm red. I'll come on to talk about these in further down the road, but a warm red such as what used to be called cadmium, but it's your pillar box red. A cool red, which you'll usually find is alizarin or carmine, and they're more of a mauvey, pinky red. Then you'll need yellows. I like to use a lemon yellow and a more, it's often called cadmium yellow, but it's a more standard yellow, and then maybe even a more orangey yellow. Yellow ochre is a good one to have, and then raw sienna, burnt umber, burnt sienna. And with those colours, you can make pretty much everything, what they call the convenience colours. So your convenience colours, if you buy a palette of 24 or more colours, you will have several greens, you will have several purples and oranges, but they are colours you can mix from your blues and yellows and reds. So convenience colours are great, but they're not necessary. If you're on a really, really tight budget, you can buy maybe a dozen tubes and buy yourself a plastic palette, and I will be showing you some examples of these. And you can use your watercolours from the tubes into your plastic palette where they will dry, and then you can keep reconstituting them, wetting them basically. What else do I need to tell you? So a lot of watercolour artists like to work with ceramic palettes, which are lovely, but they're not very portable. and they're probably something you want to put on your birthday or Christmas list rather than invest in one to start with. I still work with a plastic palette. You can work with a plate, but you've got to keep your pools of colour separate. And some people work with little ramekins of colour, but that's really only if you're doing really big washes. So going back to your paper, you really, really want to be using the best quality paper. The bigger pads are better value because you can cut them down into the size you want. There are several types of watercolour paper. So there's hot pressed, which is completely smooth and often used for botanicals and things. Then there is cold pressed not, which means it's not hot pressed. I know it's confusing, but it has the slight texture to it, has a tooth to it, has the dimples, so you get that lovely watercolour effect. Particularly if you're using paints that granulate, which is another term that comes into watercolour. And granulation is the way the pigment settles onto the paper. So something like an ultramarine blue, you know, if you use a proper ultramarine blue, it will have certain characteristics. It will spread with water quite rapidly. It will mix with other colours or play quite nicely with other colours, they like to say. And it is granulating. And that's one of the reasons you can tell if paints are cheap or if they're inks, because they don't granulate. So certain colours will, certain pigments, different pigments behave in different ways. So understanding your own palette, your own set of colours is really important, because you won't waste time trying to mix colours that don't happen. You'll know that if you go for that yellow and that blue, you'll get this green. So I always advocate swatching out your colours from your palette to start with. If you can buy the tubes and then fill the tins, that's quite a good idea. But you are then limited with the number of colours that you can use. But most, they arrive at 24 or 48. If you go for the really high-end professional ones like Schminky or Daniel Smith, I think Daniel Smith you can actually buy a 24 set and you get a free empty tin as well. So then you can use other colours if you wanted to refill. What else do I need to tell you? Brushes. So brushes need to be able to hold a lot of water. And I have the original favourite wash brush is a squirrel mop, which is proper squirrel hair, which I know a lot of people go, ooh. So I did buy one because that's what everyone lauded. And I do like to have all the kit, even if I haven't got the skills. I still like to have the kit to start with. But I also bought a Daler Rowney student grade mop brush, which actually is just as good. It still holds just as much water. And nowadays the, what do they call them? The man-made ones. Their brushes are just as good. You need something that's soft and springy and holds a lot of water. So the Cotman watercolour brushes are really good to start with. So Winsor & Newton have their professional grade paints. For watercolour, oils, gouache, you name it. But then they will also have their student grade paints, and Cotman are their student grade paints, and they are very good. So you could always buy a Cotman set, and then as those colours run out, you can buy the professional tubes and refill them. But Cotman are good to start with. Daler Rowney have a professional and a student set. I'm not so keen on their student set, but it really is a matter of choice. Who else? If you always buy from proper, or go to Jackson's Art and look up their paint sets, because they will all be good quality. And then they are usually very reasonably priced at Jackson's, but then you can go and have a look elsewhere and see if you can find them any cheaper. There are also some other suppliers like the SAA, which is an artists association. You can join their membership and buy things from them. I got a lot of really, really reasonably priced plastic palettes of them where you can put your paints in the trays.